Hello, how you doing? I wanted to make a video here just showing somewhat real time some of my techniques in printing more difficult 3D objects, specifically smaller things, really thin things. So we'll run through some examples here of some things that I've found to be more challenging, just a handful of objects here, and show you how I go about it, and get things pulled off the printer, somewhat step by step. So let's get started. For comparison's sake, let me show you a somewhat normal print using frozen 8K resin and the Elegoo Mars, and I'll step you through the cleanup process here. Here are my print settings for a fairly normal type print application, so you can pause it here and maybe learn something here, or even copy the settings for your own slicer software. But after some time, I think this print was about 5 or 6 hours, it's let me know that the print is complete. This isn't a final part. This is one I'm in development for design. I love these barbecue pans, which I line with towels. You can see it's a pilot. This is for a 10-wheeler locomotive. Use my scalpel blade here, and I like to design these rafts with a little taper in the bottom, which is really easy to sneak a blade underneath without marring the surface. Pops it loose. There we go. That print came out pretty well. Doesn't have all the detail added to it yet, so it's not fragile. A lot of these things are iterative in nature, but I say that because it came out successful. There's no imperfect things on there. There's very little detail in the beginning because I haven't finished it yet. So what that means is there's no failed parts that got left in the vat. So we don't need to clean the vat for that. We're good to go. We have a nice clean surface here. On the plate, place it back in there, tighten it down. Place the lid back over. And we're good to print the next thing. In fact, we'll probably, after test fitting, we'll go back and draw some more and try a new iteration on that. Okay, so now we have our partially cured pilot here. So I need to rinse it. I like a two-step process. I've got, for step one, a smaller container here, which has dirtier isopropyl alcohol. I like to use the 99%, which is more expensive, but I go by the cheapest stuff I can get, and I reuse it a lot. I'm always refiltering it, getting the sediment out, and eventually it all ends up here in what I'll call the dirty cleaning solution. But we can place the pilot in there, and just let it soak for a little bit. Meanwhile, we have a large cleaner here, also full of alcohol. Now, if I know it's going to be, large parts or a bunch of them or something messy, I'll definitely wear gloves, for all this, but just for this demonstration purpose. And in this simple part. Not getting anything on my hands, although I will wash my hands right afterward. Right, there we go. So we did a pre-rinse in the dirtier, and you can clearly see, you know, a lot of sediment in suspension in that fluid. Then we move it to the clean fluid over here. Maybe pop it up to about 5 minutes or so. Let that go. We can get this guy out of the way then. There's a little agitator in the bottom, spinning up. And we'll check back in 5 minutes. All right, there we go. We could have went longer than 5 minutes, but I think that was adequate just for the demonstration here. All right. So here we really want to make sure that the part is completely dry before curing it completely. Otherwise, we could get some warpage from the wet residue from the alcohol. And this is a combination rinse station and curing station, so I got to switch it over. So now's a good time to do that. We're waiting for the part to dry. Get a little turntable on there. If you're in a hurry, we can use something like a heat gun very carefully, because again, we don't want to warp the part. But generally I'll be pulling off a few parts right now, and that'll eat up some time. Then I'll go on to something else while I'm waiting for everything to dry. I might come back hours or even a day or two later because I'm working on something else like life. But rather than watch paint dry, one thing I could show you is, if we wanted to clean the vat because maybe we had a misprint, which is very common. A lot of things don't turn out well. My technique for doing that, which I think it's something unique to an Elegoo, and maybe you've even seen this on other videos, is we can first I'll move this up out of the way here. Just putting it in manual mode. Okay, back behind. I save a lot of the older sprues from previous parts. These are the structures that you have to add during the design process to add mechanical strength. So had we had a failed print, what that means is that we probably have some partially cured material in the bottom of the vat. So we can take these old sprues here, place it down in the corner of the vat like this. Make sure it's seated all the way down. I like to go about 20 seconds on my machine, at least with this. Although a different resin, there's many different kinds and colors, might require something different. But we just let it fly here for 20 seconds. And what it's doing is it's firing the ultraviolet LEDs from the bottom. I need a new air cleaner. This guy's about to give up the ghost. But okay, there's 20 seconds. And by using one of those old sprues, what it allows me to do is just come in, grab it, and it's now affixed to a 20-second thin layer of partially cured resin. Just like that. And had there been debris in the bottom of the vat, it is now part of that thin layer, which is really nice. And there's still good resin on there, so we'll let that drip off. Okay. And before disposing of that completely, that needs to cure. You shouldn't put wet resin, in the garbage. It is a hazardous material, but that's a way to do it, in a nice clean way. Again, I'm still going to wash my hands when I'm done with this, but when you're using a larger machine, this is definitely the cleanest way to do it. When you read instruction booklets, they typically will have you use like a spatula, and you got to get in there and pry and whatever, but you're just making more waste, for everything. So, all right. At this point, we have a dried part. We've waited a little bit of time here. Again, this is an imperfect part. It's a design and process. We have a choice to make. You could either fully cure this right now, or we could free it from the sprue pieces and then cure it. Depends on what I'm doing, but I'll show you with something that's stronger like this. We can free it now and then cure it, but on a very delicate part, you might want to do the opposite. It's very important to use sprue cutters here when you're doing this. This is the Micromark brand, but there's many nice options out there. They get very expensive very quick, particularly from Japan. The difference between these and diagonal cutters are, you notice that they're very thin cutters right here, and the way that they're ground, they won't induce a lateral shock into the part when you're cutting. So I can just kind of go around the perimeter here and cut some of these sprues on the outside. The more that we can cut free, the less stress we'll put on the part when we go to remove the rest. And again, this is just a prototype, something I'm working on. Still got a ways to go. I'm doing a lot of test fitting in that before I go crazy, adding all the detail. And also dialing in the settings, in the print file. But it's a good example just to show you a fairly conventional part through the print process. All right, there we go. That's fairly good. And, if I wanted to, I could go and remove like an outer layer from the outside here, and then go in and start clipping the interior pieces. I don't think that's necessary. Again, this isn't a final part, so we can kind of bend, and things will just start to free, on their own due to the compliance of the material. And very quickly, we will have a liberated part. There we go. And now we have a spare sprue, which we can save for cleaning the tank later. Here's some scrap. And being that this is partially cured, if this was a final part, a nice thing to do now would be to go around, and trim up any of the residue, little nubs there from the sprue. When I design, those supporting structures in, I try to put them in strategic locations, like line them up with bolt heads and such, so they don't distort a flat surface. But you can't always do that. But again, I'm not really going to be too concerned again, because this is just a test, a prototype print here. So let's say we went around, with our knife, we cleaned up really nice. Again, now is a good time to do that because the material is very pliable still. So now we get to the curing phase, which really we should call it the final curing phase, because in the print process, we already partially cured the part. So this is a little LED Again, ultraviolet gooseneck, and then we have these LED ultraviolet lights in the rear. This puts our protective hood on, which protects us from the LED exposure. We move over to a cure setting. We up it over to say 4 minutes or so. Hit the light, and away we go. 4 minutes, and we'll have a nice cured part that we can test fit with the model and iterate upon. All right. Even after doing this a bunch of times, it's still exciting to check out the result. Very nice. Let me see, like a couple things I'm gonna go in and fix. You know, when you stare at things on the computer monitor, they look very different than in real life. And one of the nice things about 3D printing is the ability to just iterate quickly, you know, on something. But we'll go test fit it with the model. But there you go. So there's like a kind of a normal print process, at least the cleanup from a print process. And then we'll get reset up here, and we'll do some challenging stuff next, which means we'll be back in kind of a washing phase here. But I'll just point out, in the curing station I did a little mod. I'm not sure how much it actually helped, but it certainly didn't hurt. I added some reflective tape here to the bottom to help reflect some of that ultraviolet radiated light back up to help cure the bottom side of the part. It's just you know, silver tape I had laying around anyways, so maybe it's putting it to some good use. Okay, let's move on to the next chapter. Okay, first challenging print we're going to do here is from the DT&I. This is the logo that was a large cast metal logo on the tender of the steam engines, and the way I designed this was basically doing it in one piece with a very thin backer. So the idea being you could print out this logo and affix it to a tender, and then the backer would basically just kind of blend in or melt away because it's so thin, and it would look more like the real bolted on logo. So the way to print something like this is directly to the print plate, and I've played with some settings here, and the thickness of the backer, and just kept thinning it down over and over again until it was just thick enough to hold everything together, but you know, thin enough to give the illusion that it's not even there after the part is made. When I run this through a slicer, these are my slicer settings, and I'm taking pretty much the limit of what the printer can do, which is 10 micrometer slices through that, and that's going to give the surface finesse to reveal the detail, you know, in this kind of a part. So the good news is that it prints really quick, just in a few minutes. And laying them out, and here's, you know, one of the big tricks to this is always array something like this around and print them in each of the corners of the build plate. Most of them are not going to print out successfully, and your build plate will never be perfectly square, and that'll be revealed by trying to print something like this. It's likely that some in the corners, certain corners will not print, but if you can get one to print in one of the corners, that's all you need to get the job done. All right, so let's take a look at what we have here after one series of printing. So we'll take off our build plate, and I should mention, in general, when I'm doing more challenging stuff like this, I find that I'll get better success rates if I let the vat go a little bit more on the empty side than having it fully filled. So you can see we're fairly low in resin right now, and just in my limited experience, that's better for doing some of these smaller, more delicate parts. So if we look at the build plate here, there should be, a bunch in an ideal scenario that printed, but we don't. In fact, I can see there's only two that actually successfully printed from that, and that's normal when you're trying to do something challenging like this. We're kind of way off the beaten path. So we'll use a scalpel blade. Is perfect tool for this, to just very carefully peel up one of these emblems. Pop it free. There's one. And here's number two. I came up without any fight. There we go. Okay. So now we have to do a little cleanup here. So most of the parts failed, and that's the name of the game. That's to be expected when trying to print something like this. So before reprinting, we'll definitely have to clean the tank out here. So I can grab some spare sprue structures, because there'll be the debris left behind of the other ones that didn't really work out. Place at the bottom. That'll help us grip the debris out. And I like to run about 20 seconds on that. Okay, well that's running. And clean any possible cured debris off the build plate here. I didn't see any on there. And that'll prepare it for the next print. Okay. I like these really small printers. This is an Elegoo Mars, one of the older ones. It's very easy to keep these running, and they're low maintenance. They're very easy to clean. One lesson I've learned from this is don't overbuy on your printer. Buy one that's just good enough to get the job done. Okay, put that plate back. Now that's set up to print something else or go on to the next thing. Okay, now for cleaning these, we'll use the same 99% alcohol that we might use in our large parts washer. But if we put those small parts in a big parts washer, we're gonna never get them out again. So we'll do these by hand. And I've found that the best way to do this, just with a small little tray here of alcohol, and place them inside. You have to be very delicate with this. I've found using 2 acid brushes, I'll cut the bristles shorter on one. It's perfect for holding and gently brushing off any of that uncured resin from a part such as these. Remember, they're not fully cured, so we've got to be very careful not to damage the parts. in a partially cured state. Kind of like working with two chopsticks here. You know, it's easy to just flip the parts over, brush the other sides, and that's pretty much good enough. Okay. So fish those out of there. In the interest of time, I can just blot them dry here. That one came out real good. Now, it may be the case that none of them came out good. Don't be afraid to reject the parts. This particular one only takes 6 minutes to print, so if you're not happy, you know, do another run. If you're building a locomotive, you only need 2, one for each side. All right, let me show you the rear first. Hopefully the camera will pick this up, but you know, if you look at the rear of these, you can see some geometric patterns on them, and that's the pattern of the grip surfaces, the grip feet on the build plate. And so I had to make these thick enough that wouldn't print through, because you would end up seeing that on the good side, and that took some time to dial in. But when we flip them over to the good side, you know, the DT&I logo then gets revealed. Hopefully the camera's picking that up okay. Get it really close. I don't know if it'll focus that well. Probably not. This would be an O scale, you know, variation of that. It's a beautiful logo. Again, the full size one would have been cast, and each of the letters is rounded over. They kind of melt into each other, you know, really nicely. And then there's the roundel around the circumference of them. So there we go. Again, most of them failed, but you know, we expect that. So here's 2 that survived. And if we really wanted to make these nice, you know, you could lightly wet sand the back and thin them down even more, but I think they're pretty much good to go as is. They're that thin. Now, curing, that's something we'll have to be very careful with, because these are almost paper thin. Something like this, you could use a curing station. I would only cure them a few seconds at a time. Let me back up a second. Before even thinking of curing something like this fully cured, make sure they're completely dry, which they are not right now. In fact, I can see a little bit of resin left on this one right here inside the D of DT&I. So I would rinse them one more time, and then I would probably leave them sit for maybe even a day before thinking of curing them, because if there's any moisture trapped within that resin, these are going to potato chip right up when exposed, you know, to heat. So let them completely dry, and then when you go to cure them, just do it for a few seconds, and then I would flip them over. So maybe 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then flip them over and do the back side, and then maybe flip them over again, and just rotisserie them a few times, and that would give the best result there. In total, I wouldn't go more than a couple minutes aggregated together. So there's our DT&Is. We'll set those aside, and let's print something different and equally challenging, if not more. Let's see what else we have here. New York Central. There we go. Okay. This will take a little longer because they're a little thicker, but it'll be worth it. Okay, this part took 45 minutes to do. Not too bad. And much like before, definitely don't expect most of them to turn out. But we'll see if any did. Oh. So we've got quite a crop of them turned out on both sides. Definitely not all though. Same as before, we'll just use our scalpel blade. Gently pry them up off. And one thing I thought to mention as well, resins are very temperature sensitive. Temperature changes their viscosity drastically. Where I live, it's starting to get pretty cold out, so that is especially going to cause noticeable issues with thin parts like these. So something to look for. I would definitely recommend investing in some vat heaters, like the strip heaters, USB heaters that you can wrap around a vat if you're going to try to do some printing in the wintertime and maybe you don't have a heated shop, you know, or such. Looks pretty good. Rarely when doing thin stuff do I notice something attached to the plate afterward that failed, because generally the big issue is trying to get something to even adhere to the plate and still have a well-defined part. But some of these did fail, so they're probably sitting in the bottom of the vat there. So just as before, we'll do a quick tank cleaning here. And that's why we save all these sprue pieces from other jobs. Let's do a 20-second again on that. Okay, now these are a little larger than the DT&I emblems, so we might be able to use our larger rinsing tools here. Let's give that a shot. First, let me set up the printer for the next print. There we go. Now I'm using this frozen, what is it called? Aqua Gray 8K resin with this small Elegoo printer. Every time I switch resins, which I do, especially I like the clear resins, so I've got a few different colors of those. You know, you kind of have to, I wouldn't say go back to square one, but you know, figure out all new optimized print settings, depending on the material that you're working with. Okay, you can see our tank is getting low, but there's enough in there to do just a bit more here before topping it off. Again, I like to run the tank fairly low when we're doing this small piece work. All right, let's try something a little different here. We'll try to use our larger parts cleaners for these. And one trick we can do to keep from losing our parts would be to use a small wash basket like that. I like to use 2 stages of wash. So I have this other vat here, which we'll call the dirty alcohol. That's relative. The dirtier alcohol. And eventually, that'll have to get filtered through when the resin and suspension starts to set up. So we'll do like kind of like a pre-rinse here. That'll get most of the resin off. Then we have our larger vat here. Which has the cleaner alcohol in it, so we can transfer over to that. Punch that up for a few minutes and see what we get. If we remember how to run it. Here we go. And away we go. All right, there we go. And we can blot some of that alcohol off here. Make it easier to inspect them. Now, I definitely wouldn't expect all these to have turned out perfect. But again, that's okay. If we're building a car, then we only need one of them to turn out perfect, right? And if we get a few that turn out perfect, we can give them to our friends. Cool. Okay, and then we'll start, inspecting some things. Put that on a white background. That might make it easier to see. So when I'm looking at something like this, the lettering is 20th Century Limited, and getting the interior of the R to be see-through would be nice. This one printed a little wide in the lettering. I'd probably reject that one. Same, not so great. A little bit better. Call that like a maybe. Oh, that's a nice one. Very nice. So each one's going to be a little bit different depending on where it was in the plate. Other tuning settings, that one's really good. Other tuning settings would be the exposure time. I forget on this one. I think I might have had it maybe 1.1 seconds. But something like that, that's not good. Something like that, I'm gonna mess around with. Sometimes the setting that worked really good one day won't work good on another day. That's a nice one as well. Maybe moving things around by 0.1 seconds. So a lot of these printed kind of heavy. Those are all, the lettering's kind of running together. We got 3 pretty good ones here, if not great. And then maybe like an acceptable one over there. And that might be good enough because that's all I needed. But if I was trying to increase the yield here of success, if these were at 1.1 seconds, I might try to run it at 1 second or even 0.9 seconds. But then eventually you're going to end up with, some of the letters might not even form on it. So that's the main tuning parameter there. And also, if you go too low, the part might rip apart because it won't even be cured enough, to hold together. But we at least got three fairly decent ones, out of that. And once those get painted silver, they will really pop nicely. Okay, now this is a fairly delicate part, but not extremely delicate. The last thing I wanted to say about it is when printing something flat to the plate, and this goes for the DT&I and really anything else you would print flat to the plate, you will get a little bit of a fillet around the outside where it was mated to the plate, where the exposure setting was a little higher from the base layers. So right now, while it's in a partially cured state, that's the perfect time for either taking a scalpel and lightly trimming that flash off, or you could use like a nail file to file it down right now when it's fairly easy to work the material before curing. For something like this, I would recommend the same strategy as I would use on the really thin stuff. Don't cure it all in one time. Maybe do half a minute right side up and then let it cool for a few seconds and then turn it upside down and cure for maybe half a more minute, and do that a few times just so that some of that more delicate detail doesn't start to warp off away from the part. Okay, so there we go. And we're ready to set up to do maybe one more print here I can demonstrate. We'll do something even more challenging. I think I've got a nickel plate tail sign in here. There it is, right there. And again, we're going to try to print an array of a few of them, and we'll see what happens. So let's give that a whirl, and that'll probably take about an hour or so to do, and we'll come back and see what happens. Okay. Here comes our nickel plate tail signs. And already we can see there's a lot of variance in them. Definitely a partial here. So let's see what we have. Again, we'll carefully remove these with a scalpel. I'll replace these blades fairly frequently. You can buy things like scalpel blades in bulk. That's the best way. It's a lot more affordable that way as well. Now these are trickier than the New York Central tail signs because the lettering is much thinner. So they're prone to all kinds of print errors, as we will see here shortly when we start to inspect them. Okay, we can use our little pre-rinse here in the dirtier alcohol. And again, we'll use our basket just to keep from losing them in the bottom of the solution. And we need to be a little bit more careful with these because they're very fragile at the lettering, especially until they're fully cured. looks pretty good. I think we got most of the thick stuff off. One more comment here, just on technique. When I'm printing more delicate things like this, and not even just more delicate things, but parts that have a lot more detail to them, I won't let them hang around very long in the printer. If any of that excess resin does end up curing on the part, then it's just going to end up occluding all that detail that we worked so hard to get in the first place, right? So if it's something big, I'm not really going to mind if it sits there for an hour or few until I get to taking it off. But typically when I'm doing this stuff, I'm hanging out around this part of the shop and keeping an eye on things a little bit longer. Okay, well, let's rinse that for a few minutes here and we will see what we get. Okay, there we go. And right off the bat, we can see we've got a frame there with no letters in it. That happens. And I'll flip them all here, kind of letter side down first. And we can even see some of the resin coming out in the alcohol too. Maybe I could have even rinsed that a few minutes longer. Haven't printed these in a while, so everything has a little bit different technique to it. Start taking a peek at what we have. I have done these enough to know some of the typical issues. And again, on certain days with different humidity and temperature, different issues can crop up. Let's just pluck one up here. Wow, first one I picked up looks really nice. So the first thing I'll look at on something like this is, can I see through all the lettering? So the critical stuff here would be like the hole in the A, and then where the P and the L intersect, and those look really good. But when we look at it from the end, we can see that the lettering is kind of wavy like that. So it did start to rip apart because we're printing these upside down. The letters are the last thing to go, and they really want to pull away from the frame, downward into the tray when the plate retracts. So that one's kind of like a marginal. Put that maybe in the center here. That one's even worse, and then that pulled away right here, completely separated. So we have a garbage one there. That one's more wavy. Same. And these will vary fairly drastically. Here the letters look great, but underexposed here in the corner. Same thing there. This one looks fairly decent. Nope. Pulling apart. Letters look good, but they're a tad bit wavy there. That might be correctable though when it gets fully cured. I can clean up the back with a knife, so we'll put that in the center. That might be salvageable. Empty frame. Underexposed again, right there. Right, so that's garbage. Kind of the way of the game, because this is really pushing the edge of the technology here. Also underexposed. Nope. All right. So we got a good one and two maybes. And that's how it goes. So, try to be picky with all this stuff. Seeing how this one just went, the next time I would print, I would probably, being that the letters mainly look really good, but there's some voids in the material, I would bump up the exposure setting by 1/10 of a second. So if we're 1.1 right now, I go up to 1.2 seconds of exposure per layer, and we'll see how the next one goes. But on other days, I've done the same thing, and I've had to bump it all the way down to as much as 0.9 because all the letters were kind of growing together. Again, depends on the day. So anyways, I hope that's helpful for you. Even if you're printing something completely different, I think these techniques are easy to apply to different things and help you with your print work. And if you enjoyed this, maybe I'll make some more similar videos, just kind of showing it's different stuff that I've learned. If there's a wrong way to do it, I will figure it out, and then we'll figure out the right way to do it after that. Okay, take care, and we'll talk to you later.